Well, joining us next is Peter Lowe of DNSFilter. Peter presented actually at last year's Adblocker Developer Summit, and he's been gracious enough to accept our invitation to return to this year's summit. Peter, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you again.
Thank you. Yes, so can you see my slides? Great, okay. So yeah, first of all, hi everyone. Thank you for joining to listen to me talk about fingerprinting DB and user awareness. This is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, and it's a bit of dry topic or dry subject line anyway. But yeah, first of all, quick introduction. I'm Peter Lowe. I run a block list for ads and trackers. Been doing it for quite a long time, 20 plus years or something, I think now. And I am the domain intelligence lead at DNSFilter. So I spend a lot of time thinking about domains and what's on them and what they mean and what they do. I'm also rubbish at slides, so I do apologize in advance for the plain slides with no effects or anything like that. I don't know how to work them, so I get someone in marketing to do it for me usually, but I had to do this on my own, unfortunately. So, user awareness, yeah. What I mean by user awareness is pretty simple. Basically, telling people about the tracking that's going on and all the stuff that's being tracked about them, and giving them some agency to decide what to do about that. There's some great products out there that block tracking, and my actual block list helps with that sometimes. There's things like Brave and DuckDuckGo and all the privacy focused products out there. But what I want to do is talk about letting people know about it. Yeah. So the reason why I think this is important is because that most people don't really understand the scale and the depth of what's being tracked and how it's being tracked. I think most people know that their IP address is being tracked, for example, or perhaps their browser user agent, but they don't realize that when they type something into an input field, probably every keystroke is being sent back as well, or where they hover on a page, or where the mouse is, or where the pages that they've come from, and cross-site tracking as well. So the amount of information that's being kept about people is just, most common users don't know. The other thing is that blocking tracking is hard. A lot of people, as I said, are doing really good work to prevent tracking happening, but doing it effectively without any breakages is very, very hard. And when things do break, it's confusing for end users. They don't know why. They've installed an ad blocker and it's blocking some servers, and because of that, the site fails, or it behaves more slowly, or loads differently, or parts of it fail, and end users don't really understand why that's happening. And the last thing is that I think it's important to give end users some power in how they act on the internet. There's a difference between being aware that tracking's happening and what kind of tracking is happening and how you behave, and just being unaware. And I think people act differently when they know that that's happening. I use this metaphor of walking into a cafe where you know that the staff are really gossipy and they comment on your appearance or your haircut or whatever. You can avoid that cafe if you like, or if they have really good coffee, you can go in and buy the coffee, but you just kind of do up your head before you go in or something like that. It's a crappy metaphor. I should probably stop using it, but I hope you get the idea. So I think one thing I wanted to mention is about the regulation that is appearing, or has been appearing over the last few years. I mean, everybody's aware of GDPR, and there's the CCPA and a bunch of other acronyms all over the world. And even China's getting in on the game, which is kind of remarkable, and could probably do a presentation all about the regulations on that. Unfortunately, the regulation isn't foolproof, and there are still tons of loopholes and lots of exceptions, and each flavor of regulation is different and focuses on different aspects. Some focus on the consumers, some focus on the businesses. I'm not entirely sure where China's focus is, but the point is that it's not comprehensive, and it doesn't really guarantee the basic human right to privacy, which is what I believe in. But the thing about regulation is that it's a sign that people care, and the people want to know and want to have some limits on how people are tracked online. And the regulation wouldn't exist if nobody cares about this being regulated. Then the governments wouldn't have gotten around to actually creating it in the first place. So the fact that people care, I think, is important to let people know when it's going on. So I want to talk about one particular type of tracking, which is browser fingerprinting. So for people who aren't particularly familiar with fingerprinting, what it does is it takes data points that are available to a website from the browser. That's stuff like the fonts that you've got installed, the window size, the canvas size, basically anything that is available through the APIs. And the stuff that really a lot of people don't realize is available, like battery percentage and what the order that the fonts are installed is actually a data point. It doesn't really matter what the data points are, it's just the fact that it's a data point, and all put together it creates a fingerprint which is able to uniquely identify you. And it works across sites, and it's very difficult to block for lots of reasons. I mean, you can either randomize the results, but that in itself is a kind of another data point. You can try and impersonate an average user, but the idea of an actual average user changes over time, so that has to be constantly modified to make sure that you come across as an average user. And even being the perfect average user is a data point and kind of sticks out. So it's very hard to block effectively. I know that Brave actually are doing really well at this, so credit to them for that. But I think that this is teams of people working on it, so it's tricky. I tried to think of some legit uses for browser fingerprinting, because there are some people who defend it online, and the only thing I could think of was fraud prevention. So situations where financial transactions are happening online, that's good to be able to identify who's doing it. And also some other things like gambling sites, knowing your customer and making sure that someone's not underage and that kind of thing. So fraud prevention is basically the only thing I could think of. But otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, the only times that browser fingerprinting should be used is being used for shady practices, is to get around normal tracking. Normal tracking works by sending a request to another site and recording information about who you are, and then correlating that with other visits. And it's much easier to block because you can just block access to the site itself. Obviously it's much more complex than that, but it's a lot more straightforward. So when you see browser fingerprinting happening, to me it's a sign that it's they are deliberately circumventing your choice to avoid tracking. So I started thinking about this, and I worked on a little project which I'm calling Fingerprinting DB. It's a incredibly unimaginative name. I did try and think of something a bit more snappy, but yeah, maybe someone else can give me some suggestions. So Fingerprinting DB is a modular framework which is intended to generate a database of sites using fingerprinting. It's a bunch of different components which I've put together almost as a proof of concept because of what I would like to do with the data in the end. But it's made up of three main parts: the scraper, which is just downloading data from a site, a set of checks and a kind of parent script that runs the different checks, which looks for evidence of browser fingerprinting being used on the site, and the output database, which is the thing that I really want to get to. I have put together, as I said, a kind of proof of concept, and it does work, but each part needs improvement. One of the design goals for this was that I wanted to make it easy to improve each part. So the scraper is, well, I'll go into it in a bit more detail in a minute, but each part is a kind of, first stab, and should be easy to improve, and they all need improving. So yeah, the reason that I want this database is because that fingerprinting is so shady. It's when it's happening on, I don't know, if I'm on a gaming site and I'm just playing a game and I see that fingerprinting is happening, I want to know that that's happening, and not necessarily to block it. With tracking, I think it's important that you have a choice, and it's more important that you know it's happening and you can avoid it in the future. So, for example, I own an Oculus Quest, and I know that I love my Oculus Quest, and I know that everything I'm doing on it is being uploaded to Facebook, and they're going to use that in some terrible way to violate my privacy, and so that they can serve me better ads. But I still use it because I love it so much, and it's my choice though to use it, and I think that's the most important thing. So I want to know which sites are doing this and when are they doing it. The problem with dynamic checks, there's some really good tools out there like Blacklight and other similar things, which can run a bunch of checks against the site and tell you whether browser fingerprinting and other types of tracking is being used. But they're slow and they're on demand. And there's also some great data sources out there. But there's nothing that really focused on browser fingerprinting. And I also wanted it to be something that could be, well, as I said, improved and collaborated with other people, and something that would be a kind of historical record as well, and that could be rerun by basically anybody. Most of the data sources that I've seen are difficult to recreate yourself. So that was another thing I was trying to get out of this. As I said, the goal is to build a framework that was modular and easy to improve, and get this data out of it in some format that can be reused for some of the ideas I had, to sort of allow the users to make more informed decisions about how they act on the internet, and even to avoid things in the first place, so that they know that a site has or had browser fingerprinting on it, and they can choose to go there if they still want to, or they can avoid it. And as I said, I really wanted it to be a framework rather than a kind of a sequence of, it is a sequence, it runs in sequence, but I wanted it to be each component to be able to be upgraded by someone who really knows what they're doing, because I think for each area, I'm not an expert, but there's definitely value in putting it all together, which is what I was trying to do. So to go into each bit, the scraper currently, it downloads a site as a WARC file, which is an archive format that will record the request and the response, including all the headers that are sent and received. And it's a great way of just getting the contents of an entire site and having all the little bits there that might be used for browser fingerprinting. It's also quite extensible, so you can have multiple requests inside one WARC file, and you can compress them and all sorts. Currently, I've just put a wget command, which has a fake user agent and outputs it as a WARC file. It's crap, but it works. And for the purposes of testing this and seeing if the browser fingerprinting actually detects browser fingerprinting and gives some useful output, it was all I needed. But like at my job, I work with a product called WebTrinker, where we have pretty complex scraping going on, and full Chrome headless sessions, which run for multiple locations and do, much more complex down archiving and scraping. So I know this can be improved a lot. And another thing is I want to get this up quickly and get it running quickly, but replace parts of it with longer running things. So running a headless Chrome browser and setting up the environment to do that, and perhaps load balancing it and all that sort of thing. It should be easy to just rip out what I've got and plug in a better solution. So that's what I've got for now for the scraper. This is the file. It's just an extract of the script that gets run, the command that gets run from the script. It's literally just the wget command. I actually, even when I did this, I found that it was, even though I've got the timeout thing in there, I had to add a cron job which killed wget every 5 minutes. So it's definitely not perfect, but works well enough. The checks are basically, there's a parent script which runs all the checks. It just looks inside the checks folder and runs anything that's executable. And each check is a single script which does something. A non-zero exit code from any of the scripts means that browser fingerprinting has been detected and some output gets added to the output database, or the detection database. I've used JSON as the output format because I think it's pretty much readable by basically everything these days. And it's human readable as well, which is nice. So you can actually kind of dig in and have a look yourself. It's very flexible, and there's tons of different options here, and this sort of side of things could be improved in that the output could be improved. There's more output that could be returned by the checks. If there's debug output that could be added, for example, like inside a check, if there are multiple things being looked for, what exactly was matched. But again, the idea here is each check should be easy to add one. So anybody can say, hey, I know this means that fingerprinting is being used, and just throw in a script that checks for that thing. But then also things like the FP inspector, which is pretty heavyweight, but it should be easy to insert that and feed any kind of input to the things that are being run and look at the output. As long as there's a non-zero exit code, then you know that fingerprinting has been detected, and the rest is to be decided, or whatever is the best way to deal with the output. This is an example of one of the checks. It's ripped straight out of the easy privacy rules. Thank you, Ryan. It just looks for some basic fingerprinting scripts, like fingerprint.js and some, I think these are elements that it looks for. It's very simple, as you can see, but again, it works well enough to run and see sites which are unusual sites which are finding fingerprinting, using fingerprinting. Sorry. So the output, as I said, I chose JSON as the output format because I think it's pretty universal. But the output really could be anything. It could be XML or I don't know, CSV, text files, anything. I wanted it to be one file per site because I think it's more important to have an idea about the site itself. So let's say there are sub URLs which are using browser fingerprinting, but not on the main page. I think there's obviously exceptions like this. One of the things I deal with at work is content servers, which, by definition can have any kind of content on them. So you would need some way of dealing with that. And, but essentially what I'm looking for is when I go to a site, is this site using browser fingerprinting somewhere? So that's what I've got for now. And here is an example of an output file. I actually need to clean up the URL list there. That's ripped out of the WARC file, and I think I need to take off those angle brackets. But it's very simple. It's just got what was scanned, what's the source, what's the output, and when did it happen. And this is like a stub, basically. I would totally expect that more, more information would be added to this. So right now, the status of this little project is that I have put it all together. And I think that in doing that, I've achieved something actually useful. And I'm working on some other bits, which I'll talk about in a sec. But I think for me, it was really surprising to see some of the results. What I did was I took a top 10K list and for the initial run, and then a bit later I played around with some other lists. And currently on the repository, there is an output from a top 5K lists. And some of the ones in there are really surprising. I didn't realize that like Flickr used browser fingerprinting so heavily, and that Hungarian sites were so popular. They like browser fingerprinting so much. That was quite surprising. It's actually one of the other things I think we can get out of this data is some kind of reports or historical analysis, maybe some trends over time, like who was using browser fingerprinting, what kinds, looking at the different types of checks that were matched over a history, like what techniques are being used, that kind of thing. It's not what I'm personally going to be working on, but I think once the data is there and the historical, the historical reports are there, it could be done by someone. So yeah, I've got some stuff. I haven't been able to spend as much time on this as I would like. Work has been kind of crazy, but I have got to the point where there's something to look at now. I just today made the GitHub repository public, and I have to say the reason I didn't do it before is because I'm scared of what people are going to say. So take a look, and well, you'll see the URL in a sec. Some improvements. These are all obvious improvements. The scraper could be, faster, distributed, better at faking. It currently just fakes the user agent. It could be a proper session. It could be use different headless browsers. There's a ton of different improvements there. The checks are very basic. There's some kind of interesting ones there. I think I've got 4 or 5 so far, which was enough to get some good data. Definitely could be more detailed, and the debug output could be more useful. And I've got some ideas about things to add. I didn't really want to do too much at this point because I was hoping to get some feedback to see what other people thought might be useful. And the thing is, once you let something out into the wild, it's very difficult to remove stuff. So that's a consideration. And the output database does need more metadata, I think. So I think in general, it would be good to have a kind of sort of standard for the debug output. I have some logs which get created when I run the parent. I've got a kind of one overall script which does the scraping and the checking and the output and everything. And those logs are kind of interesting to look at to see, what it's been accessed and where it's been detected, and just as a kind of stream of consciousness almost from the framework. But that definitely could be made more useful. So some of my ideas that I had to use this data and the output from the database was, first of all, a simple API that you could send it the query for is fingerprinting on this site and get back a yes or a no. I think if you made it super simple and encrypted and with like K anonymity or something, and you could avoid tracking, and you could make it very fast. You could stick it in front of Cloudflare, and the payloads will be very small, so it could be useful for dynamic checking for when you're on a site. A browser plugin is something I thought of because I think you could compress the essential information down to a fairly small payload that would be possible to embed inside a plugin. And then you could perhaps use the API to get more information. So the API could have give me more information about this site in particular, or give me the history for this site, that kind of thing. And yeah, a way back alike. So I keep on talking about the historical trends on a site about the fingerprinting that they've been using and how they've been using it. I find that kind of fascinating to find, reputation history is an important thing to know about something. Like, it might be clean right now, but what was it like, last week, or what's for the last 10 years, or I don't know how long it would be, obviously from now. So hopefully this is around in 10 years, but we'll see. So that's kind of it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I know I've gone a bit short here, but if anybody's got any questions, I would love to hear them. Here is the URL for the fingerprinting repository. Take a look and tell me what you think.
Well, Peter, I, for one, was very impressed by both slides and metaphors.
The slides, yeah.
Fantastic. And you going a bit short is not a problem at all, because we did get a couple of questions in during your presentation. Let's try to at least get one of them answered. Chirag Singhal has asked, what is the future of DNS content blocking? I've started to see that blocking Amazon-adsystem.com breaks the Amazon app. And similarly, many sites use CNAME, and big tech is using the same domain for both tracking and content. Sort of a big question there to unpack.
That's a big question. DNS, I mean, I work for a DNS filtering company, so forgive me for being immediately biased. DNS filtering is a great layer to put in there that has an immediate effect, and it can be very, it's easy to deploy. But it is a kind of hammer. So it has. It's cost effective, it's very easy to deploy for an entire network, but if you want anything more fine-grained to fix these kind of issues like breakages on Amazon because of Amazon ad system, you need full URL filtering and full URL interference. So the future of DNS blocking, it's not going away. It's always going to be useful, but it needs to be used in combination with other things as well, I think.
Yeah, we've got time for one more. We have another one here from Sophia Lindberg. You had mentioned earlier in your presentation that a lot of users aren't even aware of the fact that they're being tracked. Yeah. And Sophia is wondering, what are some effective approaches that you've seen when it comes to raising that awareness of informing users that they're being tracked?
Yeah, well, the regulation is a really good sign. And I think the fact that I'm seeing articles on the BBC, which I mentioned last year, I think, about tracking and data collection and stuff like that is a step in the right direction. One thing I really like to see, sorry for not answering your question properly, and this is one of the ways I thought that a browser plugin could work, is that it could highlight links to sites where fingerprinting has been used or like heavily detected. So you could be warned before you even go to a site. So it's that kind of preemptive blocking where you let the user decide whether they want to continue or not, or maybe like an interstitial page or something like that. So I think the main awareness things I've seen have been the data breaches. Actually, a lot of the data breaches that have happened in the past, and my God, there are a lot of them, are a great way of letting people know about the kind of data that's being stored and shared and sold about people, because then they suddenly become concerned. Hey, oh my God, my password, which I use on 10 sites, has been leaked, and yeah, it gets into the news and it makes people scared, and they realize that it shouldn't have been stored in the first place. So thanks, hackers.
Yes, a phrase that I wasn't sure I'd hear today during the summit, but there we go. So thank you, Peter, for taking some time to give your presentation and take some questions. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.